The Torah portion of Lech Lecha begins with the words, God said to Avram, go away from your land, your birthplace, and your father's house. Later we read that Avram left as God had told him, and Lot went with him. Now, according to Kabbalistic teachings, every soul has three components. The nefesh, which is the soul, the ruach, which is the spirit, and the neshama, which is the pneuma. And what God is saying here to Abraham is that every soul has to pass through at least 3 incarnations in order to achieve its perfection and full spiritual healing. And therefore God says, go away from your soul, your spirit, and your pneuma, from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house. It's a threefold departure, because that is what the soul has to do to be healed. That is an insight from Rabbi Joseph Caro, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, in his spiritual diary called Magid Mesharim, which is this fascinating Kabbalistic spiritual work which is he received from an angel. If you've been watching the Torah in 10 podcast for the last couple of weeks, you will be familiar with the dysfunctional souls which Adam created in the 130 years that he separated from his wife. These deeply, deeply damaged souls appeared once again in the generation of the flood, and they appeared once again in the generation of the Tower of Babel. And finally, in this week's Torah portion, they make their third appearance. Why do I say finally? Because in Job we read, God does all these things to a man twice, even 3 times. You can only have 3 reincarnations unsuccessfully before you finally achieve your tikkun, your spiritual healing. God is not going to put you through a washing machine of reincarnation for 100 generations. It's too painful for the soul to come back. 3 times. And then we finally achieve spiritual healing. Obviously, the generation of Sodom, which was the third reincarnation of these dysfunctional souls, they didn't succeed in healing themselves, and unfortunately, tragically, we saw what happened there. But they will reappear again, the dysfunctional souls. Who are they? You'll never guess who. It's the Jewish people in the generation of Egypt. And then finally, they will achieve their tikkun, their spiritual healing. In chapter 15, we read the terrifying account of Abraham's vision of the future suffering of his people. This is at the covenant of the parts. He is told in a vision that his descendants will be strangers in a land, they will be persecuted for 400 years, and afterwards they will leave with great wealth. And finally, in chapter 15, verse 15, we read, you will come to your forefathers in peace. What does that mean? So the Midrash in Bereshis Rabbah says, here God informed Abraham that his father Terach would merit the afterlife. Now, of course, Terach was the classic idol worshipper. We all know the story how Abraham destroyed all his father's idols. How did he merit the afterlife? And also, what's it got to do with this whole story of Egyptian exile? Why is the exile and slavery of Abraham's descendants connected with Terach's later teshuvah or return to God? So we can explain this again through reincarnation. Terach, according to Rabbi Isaac Luria, 16th century Kabbalist, was reincarnated as Job. Job was, according to the Talmud, an advisor to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh had this idea that he's going to kill all the Jewish children, Jewish boys, and throw them into the Nile, one of the advisors to him on that occasion was Job. And all the later suffering of Job, which he endured, is considered to be a tikkun, a process of spiritual healing for that terrible advice, that terrible panel of advisors which he was a member of. So through his suffering, Job achieves tikkun, and therefore he merits the afterlife. And that's why this is mentioned in the story, in the vision of the covenant of the parts, because it's precisely because of the Egyptian exile that Terach merited the afterlife. In chapter 16 we read of the tragic rift between Sarah and Hagar, eventually leading to Hagar being evicted from Abraham's house. Why do we fight with people so much? I mean, sometimes it's just an individual in your life that you just can't stand. And the only way you can cope is just by getting rid of them. Why does this happen? So obviously it could be many reasons. But interestingly, Rabbi Isaac Luria writes that sometimes a soul is split into two people. A little bit like, identical twins. You have one egg splits up and you have two identical children. All that can happen spiritually. One big soul can get split into two and end up in two different people. And that will actually have the result of those two individuals vying with each other and attacking each other constantly and feeling in tension with each other. Why? Because they're both vying for one soul. They both feel that really that other person's got my soul. I can't really exist as a normal, full human being because that soul's being kind of sucked away at its root by my opponent. So next time you feel in a dispute with someone, just think about this. Might be the case. Might just be that they have the other half of your soul, and then wouldn't be the right thing to be to live harmoniously with your other half rather than fighting all the time? Interesting insight. Chapter 17, verse 5, we read the account how Avram's name was changed to Avraham, to Abraham. Your name shall no longer be called Avram, but your name should be Avraham. For I have made you the father of many nations. Now the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Brachot, page 13a, says that one who refers to Abraham as Avraham as Abram, in other words, you use his old name, commits a sin. I mean, why is that a sin, to call someone by their old name? So there's many explanations for this, but we can fathom it, spiritually speaking, by looking at the differences in the names. Avram and Avraham only differs by one single letter, the letter He, the Hebrew letter He. And the significance here is that Avram, his prior name, stands for exalted father. In other words, Av can also refer to Chachma, to wisdom, exalted wisdom. Now you might have some very exalted wisdom, you might be inspired, you might have some fascinating ideas, but there's always the challenge of communicating that wisdom outwards. Communication is represented by the letter He, because when the He is written down, it fills the full width of the font and the full X height of the font. It's the widest, highest, fattest letter. Obviously, the Lamed goes above the line, the Kuf goes below the line, but within the confines of the X height of the font, it's the full size letter. And therefore the He represents fleshing out. It represents expanding, clarifying, detailing, expounding an idea until it becomes clear to the audience. Avram, lofty wisdom, gained a He, the gift of articulation, the gift of communication, to spread the ideas of monotheism, of spirituality, of Judaism to the world. And therefore anyone who calls Avram commits a sin. Because if you retain lofty wisdom to yourself, when you have the ability to communicate it, it's a crime. Spiritual message for the week. How inspiring is the opening of this week's portion where Abraham is simply told to go. And he's not told where he's going. He has to leave his father's house, he has to depart from everything he feels comfortable with, and he's told to go. God says, to the land I will show you. Would you be willing to take a journey to nowhere, not knowing where you're going? It needs a certain amount of trust. And that is something which is a good idea to build on this week. The trust, because we really don't know where we're going. As much as we think we know where we're going, we have our careers planned out, our families planned out, what we're gonna, how we're gonna educate our kids. We don't know what the future will hold. And therefore it's important to have trust in life as a journey to nowhere. Think about it, work on it this week, and God willing, we will see you again next week for Torah in 10.